Today's webinar, as you signed up for, is on the erroneous use of sole source socioeconomic based awards against federal supply schedules or GWACs, such as a HUBZone sole source award would be one example. Today's agenda, we're going to go through some definitions of these acronyms and terms. Then we're going to look at, we're going to break this up into 4 parts, let's call it. We're going to look at HUBZone, service disabled veteran-owned and women-owned small business sole source awards against federal supply schedules. Let's call that group 1. 8A sole source awards against federal supply schedules. And then the next group, and then the next turn on that is the same thing. But HUBZone, SDVO, WSB, sole source awards against GWACs, and 8A sole source awards against GWACs. There's a reason why I broke it up like that, and it'll become evident as we walk through this. And then, a reverse as to how things are normally done. I'm going to go through introductions and who Fed Data Check and Potomac Wave is at the end of the webinar. And the reason I do that is it's the same every time, so that people who come here for the weekly webinar, they don't have to stick around for these last 2 bits if they don't want to. Okay. Some definitions. What are socioeconomic sole-based awards? I'm going off the FPDS&G Data Dictionary, version 1.5, and the data field is 10N, type set aside. So in there they define 6. HUBZone sole source, SDVO SBS, service disabled veteran-owned small business sole source. I think I left off an S there. We'll take a look. 8AN, 8A sole source, VSS, veteran sole source, WOSBSS, women-owned small business sole source. That's not in the data dictionary, but it is a new sole source authority that is available to use, as many of you know. Economically disadvantaged women-owned small business sole source. Let's pull up that data dictionary. Take a look at that. FPDS&G version 5 data dictionary. Type set aside field 10N. There are no sole source definitions on this page, but if you go to the second page, then you get into HUBZone sole source. And they give you a FAR reference for the authority. There's the service disabled. No, it is S. I thought they would have put an SS on that. Seems like they left off the sole source. They just put one S on there, but that's the code. SDVO SBS. There's that 8AN sole source. We need to get to 6, right? I have 6 on the PowerPoint slide. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So there's 3. Veteran sole source is down here. There's 4. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. And they haven't added the 2 women-owned small business sole sources to the data dictionary yet. WOSBSS, EWOSBSS. Okay. Now here's a question for the group. Is it a misnomer, and this was recently explained to me or posed to me in the last few days. You notice that those data dictionary, all of these set-asides were in the data dictionary field type set-aside. I did have someone say that it is a misnomer to call a HubZone sole source award a set-aside, because a set-aside is by definition a competitive award. You can call it HubZone a HubZone sole source award, but it's not correct terminology to call it a set-aside. Let's take a, I like to make these things interactive. Let's see if we can see what the group thinks on that. There's a question on that. Okay. I'm getting 100% yes so far on that. I'm getting some no's. Okay, I think that gives us a pretty good response. So I think you can see that, right? But anyway, about 80%, 78% said yes, a set-aside must involve competition, and 22% said no, a sole source award is simply a type of set-aside. So I'll have to look into that some more. I might use it interchangeably at this point. I'm not sure what the answer is on that. Most of the group here seems to think that option is that terminology. It's really not correct to call a sole source award a set-aside. But anyway, that's not important for our discussion today. I just thought I would mention it. Okay, now in terms of these six, I did get a question on if a BI by Indian, is that a sole source? I'm only talking about sole source awards. And I think what we're saying here is a BI by Indian set-aside that can be a competitive set-aside. So that's not what we're talking about in terms of sole source. So we'll have to take that up after the webinar to discuss that more. So in terms of our discussion today, I'm not going to be talking about VSS, Veteran Sole Source Awards. Why? Because against FSSs or GWACs, there haven't been any, at least since FY09. So I don't know how often they're used or in what context they're used, but I know they're not used in context of in reference to when they're being used as a delivery order, an order against an FSS or GWAC. So VSSs are out today. HS3, those are HubZone 8A with an 8A preference. Actually, I think that could be a competitive one. In any event, that was deprecated in FY09, so that's not a part of this discussion. And women-owned small businesses set-asides and economically disadvantaged women-owned small business set-asides. These two here, I'm treating those as one. So let's just collapse those into WSBSS. To keep it simpler. So here, what's the bottom line? I broke them out into two groups: HubZone sole source, service disabled, veteran-owned small business sole source, women-owned small business sole source. That's group one. And then group two is going to be the 8A sole source. So out of these six here, we filtered them down to four. VSS got thrown out. WOSBSS, EWOSBSS, the two women-owned, got merged into one. All right, here, let's get into the meat of the issue. Sole source awards against an FSS using HubZone sole source, SDVO sole source, women-owned small business sole source. Okay, now the first point here is that these, and I'm going to go through the FAR. If people have a comment on this, feel free. This is based on the information I've read. And let me back up. Let me just digress for a minute here and explain how all this came up. We were flagging awards that looked like they were 8A set-asides, but were not coded as such in FPDS-NG. So someone, recorded an order against a multiple award contract in FPDS-NG. That order received one offer. In the Fair Opportunity Limited Sources field, it would say something like other statutory authority, and an 8A recipient got the award. I guess we can look at an example. And anyway, we're looking through it, and we're seeing awards that say, boy, this sure looks like it looks like it could be an 8A award. And what they did was they did not set the type of set-aside field properly, such that the agency was getting 8A credit. We've had a couple of webinars on that in the past. So then what we would do is we would flag, well, actually, let's see if we can find one. We would flag awards that looked like they were 8A set-asides, and they were referencing a federal supply schedule or a GWAC. Well, I think there might be one. And I'm not trying to, when I go through these examples and I pick a department, I'm not trying to do it to highlight one versus another. I'm just trying to find examples. And if there weren't plenty of these examples across the federal government, we wouldn't be putting any effort into this. It would be a waste of time. But let's see if we can find one here. And I might let this run and go back to the discussion. So anyway, I'm going to let that run, and I'm going to come back to it. So we would go through, and that's part of what we're doing now with some new data checks and new reports, is that we're helping agencies ensure that they're getting all the 8A credit they deserve. You can make you can make 1,000 or more awards to 8A, SBA certified 8A vendors, and put in the contracting officer determination of business size, put an S there, and you could, it's never going to happen, but theoretically you could come to the end of the year and have 0% for your 8A small business goaling percentage. Why is that? It's because to get credit for your 8A awards, the type of set-aside field must be set to 8A sole source or 8A competed. In other words, you have to go through the SBA procedure to get 8A credit. Just because you made an award to an 8A company and it was a small business award, you'll get small disadvantaged business credit, SDB credit for that, but you're not going to get that 8A credit unless that type of set-aside field is set properly. So let's see if we have any here that look like they would be suspicious. Now let's look at this one. And not only is this, we think it is suspicious, when we send these alerts and messages out, I'd say 95 or 99% of the time it comes back, yes, it was an 8A award, but I could, the explanation is I couldn't set the type of set-aside field because it was ghosted out. So here's an order. This is against an FSS. You see, why don't you take my word for it? Okay, it did go to an SBA certified 8A program participant, an indicator that it was an 8A award, but not necessarily, of course. I come down to the small business size. Boy, it's a small business. Yeah, actually, that goes along with 8A. Now, what's going on here? It's against a federal supply schedule. Only one offer was received, and in the fair opportunity limited sources, they put only one source, other. 99% of the time, if not closer to 100% of the time, what the CO meant to do was to put in the fair opportunity limited sources field SS, sole source, and then that unghosts out the type of set-aside field, in which case they would put 8A and 8A sole source there. And then once that type of set-aside field is set, then you get credit for the 8A award. So we were flagging all of these type of awards, which is good. But then the story we got back from 2 different agencies was, hey, that's great, but they're not supposed to be doing that anyway. So there's actually 2 errors in this. There's a coding error they didn't code in FVDS&G what actually happened in the contract file. And then the second error is a procurement error. You don't have authority to issue an 8A sole source award against a federal supply schedule if that federal supply schedule itself did not use an 8A competed or an 8A sole source. We're going to get that getting a little complicated. But let's just take a look at the federal supply schedule to make sure on that case. So this is the federal supply schedule of that one we just looked at. Yeah, you see the type of set-aside was no set-aside used. Now, if the federal supply schedule had used 8A competed, or if the federal supply schedule had used 8A sole source, then doing a task order against that and using an 8A sole source award would be okay. Full and open on the, as we'll see, full and open on the FSS, 8A sole source on the order, it does not comply with the FAR. Okay, boy, that was a digression, but that's the background of how we got started on this. Okay, so now we're talking about, to shift gears here, we're talking about HubZone, SDVO, and WSB, that group one against the federal supply schedule. Okay, why is that not allowed? Let's look. Each of the FAR subparts dealing with this authority specifically excludes orders against federal supply schedules. So let's look at, for an example, let's look at 19-1304C. Okay, 19. We're in the small business program. 1304 will come down to HubZone. 19-1304, the exclusions, C. So this is the HubZone subpart. What's excluded? What's not covered by this authority? Orders against federal supply schedules. And they do have a but here, and we'll take a look at that. But 8405-5, that's an important but. So this is one indicator that HubZone sole source, we're only talking about sole source, against federal supply schedules are not allowed. And there's one of those exclusions for SDVO and WOSB as well. And here are the citations. All right, now let's go look at, we need to go look at that 8405, but let's look at 84056 in the federal supply part of the FAR. 8, so this is required sources and supplies and services. 84 federal supply schedules. 84056, limiting sources. So when can you limit your sources when ordering against a federal supply schedule? And you come down here, 8045A, 1. Let me make sure I got the right reference. 804A1IA, A1IA, and here they are. Here's the 3. Incidentally, how's my screen? Is that screen big enough for people to see? If people are having trouble seeing my screen, let me know. I can make it a little bigger. Okay, 3 reasons they give you the authority to limit sources when ordering against a federal supply schedule. Urgent and compelling need exists. Only one source is capable of providing the supplies or services. In the interest of the economy and efficiency, the new work is a logical follow-on to an original order, to an original federal supply schedule order. None of those are socioeconomic based. There's no authority in 804056 to limit sources based on socioeconomic status. Again, we saw a specific line in the exclusions in FAR Part 19 saying this does not apply to orders. It's excluded. when ordering against federal supply schedules. Okay. Please make larger. Please make larger. Okay. All right. I've had that. Thank you. I've had that comment before, so I'll work on making the screen larger. Please make that comment again if it's still not large enough. But I'll pay attention to that. Okay. Now it does talk about in that third. Remember that says, but see 8405 for discretionary set-asides of orders. Now we did have that original poll where about 80% of you said that set-asides only involved competitive awards. Sole source awards cannot be described as set-asides. A lot of you didn't say that, but that's okay. That's one indication here where this 8405-5 is still not going to give us the authority to do a sole source socioeconomic award against the federal supply schedule. But let's see what it says. 8405. I actually printed this out. Let me get it here. 8405. There's 8405.5. Okay, so we're going to go up to 8405.5. And we'll make this bigger. 8405.5. Here we go. Although the preference programs of Part 19 are not mandatory, in accordance with Section 1331 of Public Law 11240, that would be the Small Business Jobs Act, if I'm not mistaken. Ordering activity and contracting officers may, at their discretion, set aside orders for any of the small business concerns identified in 19.00A3. We'll talk about BPAs down next. Okay, so they're saying you can limit sources, do set-asides as identified, small business concerns identified in 19.000A3. Let's go take a look at that. 19.000A3. Setting acquisitions aside for exclusive competitive participation by small business 8A participants, HUBZone, small business concerns, SDVO, SB, economically disadvantaged, women-owned. So that's the argument we're making. And that's my understanding. And that's, if someone has a comment, now would be a good time to speak up, because once you accept that interpretation of the FAR, the rest falls into place. So what we saw was you cannot do orders against federal supply schedules are excluded from these subparts in the FAR. There's no authority to limit sources based on the federal required services and the federal supply schedule subpart of that, Part 8. They do give you authority in 854055, but that only refers to competitive set-asides. Doesn't refer to sole source. All right, let's see what we got. Are there any FSS, I do have a question, are there any FSS contracts that were awarded as 8A contracts? The answer is yes on that. There was one, we'll take a look at that. I know there was one 8A, there are 8A set-asides. There are 8A sole source FSSs. And there was one 8A competitive, and that's an old one. No, excuse me. So there was some 8A ones. There were no HUBZone, SDVO, or WSB competitive set-asides, except an old one that expired in FY09. I don't think there are, I'll take a look, but I don't think there are any sole source ones of these either. Well, we will run into that on the 8A side, but we're not running into that now. So let's take a look at an example of one that's not allowed. Let's take a look at an example of that, and I'll make the screen, I'm going to go back to making the screen bigger. Okay. I have the examples on the PowerPoint deck. What I'd like you for now to accept that these are, well, I hate doing that. I don't even want to do that. So let's plug in this just to make sure. Federal Supply Schedule, this is what it's referencing. It's an older one. It's hard to tell. I have to come down to see what the type of set-aside was. Well, I still can't see. But anyway, it was not a socioeconomic set-aside on the FSS. If I come down here, this is that order against the Federal Supply Schedule, and it is a hub zone sole source. So that's not allowed. FPDS&G allows you to put it in, but through that FAR logic I just put in, it's not compliant. So I think I've shown an agriculture. I think I've Justice. I've shown an agriculture example as part of the handouts, and part of what I'll send you tomorrow. You'll be able to look through your department. Now here's all the ones that are in that category. These are hub zone sole source awards against federal supply schedules. They're never, no matter what the set aside is on the FSS, these are never permissible, actually. See, I know that we have a lot of people from, so you can go through these at your, you know, you see them. So here's Justice with a women-owned, Interior with a women-owned one. You can go through these at your leisure. This is part of our Excel interface into FPDS&G data. You could actually run ad hoc reports off of it. But check these out. Go through the examples. See if there are any that look familiar to you. And if you have any questions or comments, send us a response. My contact information is at the end of the PowerPoint deck. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. How about any comments? Anybody want to, Chuck, I'm going to have to, Chuck, I know you have a question there. I'm going to have to get to it later. It's a little long for me to get through right now. I do have a question. Are there any FS contracts I've awarded as 8A contracts? And we're going to see that now. And the answer is going to be yes, it was. There is. And it's mostly 8A sole source. It's mostly a lot of the FSSs are 8A sole source awards. I think there's a couple 8A competed, but we're going to see an example of that, Bruce, and we'll use that Excel spreadsheet to look at a lot of them. Okay, so that was group one, sole source, hub zone, service disabled, women owned against a federal supply schedule. The conclusion was working through the FAR, not permitted, ever. And now let's look at group two, sole source, and this is against an FSS, and we're going to use an 8A sole source set aside. So just as we saw in 84056, limiting sources, that was not, there's nothing in there that's socioeconomic based. Remember that? That was the three. Let's see. Okay, 84056, right? 84056, limiting sources. And these A through C, there's nothing in there that's socioeconomic based. So that includes 8A. So we're starting out with no authority there. But in 198046A, it says separate offers and acceptance are not required for individual orders under multiple award contracts, including federal supply schedules managed by GSA that have been set aside for exclusive competition among 8A contractors. So that's a key distinguishing point there, is that if the multiple award contract was in the 8A program, then you can do it's an indicator that you can do sole source orders against that 8A multiple award contract. Here's another piece of the puzzle, and it's a FAR case 2040002. So it hasn't been finalized yet. But you can click on the hyperlink and go out and read it. And we'll come back to this FAR case too. And it all ties back to the Small Business Job Act of 2010. These are the proposed amendments to the FAR. 198046B, sole source orders. The contracting officer may issue an order as a sole source when a multiple award contract was set aside for exclusive competition among 8A participants. So that, again, that link, if it's an 8A MAC, you can do an 8A sole source. What if the FSS was an 8A competitive set-aside? Okay, it's virtually unheard of. The last FS8A competed award was in FY04, and all of them are now expired in terms of their last date to order. But if so, an 8A sole source award against an FSS that used an 8A competed set-aside is allowed. So that's the distinction between these two groups. Those initial three we looked at in the 8A. And let's take a look at these two examples and see if it becomes clearer in the FAR and the NFPDS&G. Okay. Looks like we have an EPA delivery order. Let's go take a look at the federal supply schedule. Federal supply schedule. Make this a little bigger. Type is set aside, full and open on the type is set aside. Now you come over to the delivery order referencing that full and open federal supply schedule. I'm seeing an 8A SBA certified 8A program participant as the vendor, and I'm seeing an 8A sole source set aside. That's not allowed. So that's one that's not FAR compliant. Why? Because nothing in that FAR Part 8 allows you to limit sources based on socioeconomic status. Okay, let's look at this other one. I'm getting a bunch of questions here. I'll take a look. Okay, let's look at this. And this might get, Scott, this might get back to one of your early questions on are there federal supply schedules that used an 8A set-aside? So here's the federal supply schedule. Vendors an 8A program participant. And this federal supply schedule did use an 8A sole source. Therefore, when Treasury goes in and puts a task order against that federal supply schedule, naturally, go ahead and put 8A sole source. If it doesn't propagate down, make sure that 8A sole source is in the type of set-aside field on the order. That one obviously is FAR compliant. So the answer to that earlier question of are there any FS contracts that were awarded as 8A contracts, the vast majority, it's probably 99% now referred to FSSs that were 8A sole source awards. There were some older ones that were 8A competed. Okay, so a mixed bag here on that. On this one, not allowed. Sole source using these socioeconomic categories. This one depends. You got to check the FSS type of set aside. What about competitive economic awards against an FSS? If you go back to those exclusions, it does say when you look at service disabled veteran owned 1404C, If I'm clicking too fast, let me know too. So 1404C, well, you can't, I guess I can't do a service disabled veteran owned set aside against a federal supply schedule. It says it's excluded. Obviously, as we've seen, that's not true because they give you that reference to 8405-5. Just to beat that into the ground. 84055 says contracting officers at their discretion may set aside orders for set aside small business concerns identified in 19A00A3, and that's where you get that set aside competitive set aside authority based on socioeconomic status. So all those are allowed. No problem there. You want to do a competitive set aside against a federal supply schedule at the contracting officer's discretion. And of course, you got to follow the other rules, but nothing to be concerned about there as far as FAR compliance is concerned. Let's see if I have any questions here. Okay, one other one. So is there a trigger that will not create a non-compliant FAR part? Good question, Dana. Thank you. And the answer to that is no. If you want to put in 8A sole source awards against federal supply schedules that were awarded through full and open competition, you can do that all day long. There's nothing in FPDS&G that's going to prevent you from doing that. Now I do hear the next comment is, well, why not? Why doesn't FPDS&G put in these controls? They're in a difficult position in a lot of ways, and given the demand on them to be able to accept all the data that needs to be inputted and made available to the public. They're the system of record. And secondly, not all those who report to FPDS&G are bound by the FAR, or they have rules specifically for them. The Federal Aviation Administration voluntarily reports their data to FPDS&G, but they're not bound by the FAR. So, weeding through all that so that they know just what rules to enforce and which ones not is not a straightforward example. Okay. Now we're going to go on to the next phase, which is we're just going to repeat what we did there, except we're going to look at GWACs. Okay, we saw that HubZone, sole source, SDVO, small sole source, and women-owned sole source, they're not allowed against FSSs. What about GWACs? And the answer is no. The same rules apply. That's what we're saying. Let me go to this poll here and see what the group thinks. What are GWACs? Okay. Interesting. About 50-50. Okay. And the answer is 1. It's contracts for IT established. Let's take a look at the definition here. And I have that in here it is here. Let's see if this is the right link. This is from NASA Soup, which of course has a lot of GWACs. It's thinking. Well, the answer, I pulled the definition of GWACs from that first question there. I'm waiting on, here we go. What is the difference? This is on NASA Soup. What is the difference between a government-wide acquisition contract and a multi-agency contract? Government-wide acquisition contracts are task order delivery contracts for information technology established by one agency for government-wide use. Now, maybe I shouldn't, but I look upon GWACs and FSSs as essentially the same. I mean, I understand GWACs are focused in on IT, and I understand that FSSs are associated primarily it doesn't have to be, but overwhelmingly with GSA, GWACs. I think of NASA, NITAC, HHS, also GSA. If anyone else has a better definition of GWACs, if you could raise your hand, I'll gladly turn the mic over to you and let you explain it. Okay. Not particularly important, but there are a few wrinkles that we'll see in terms of our discussion on the FAR compliance of sole source awards. Let's see here. Okay. Slideshow, that's what I want from current slide. Okay, sole source awards against the GWAC. Okay, there's you know, if you want to equate FSSs and GWACs, they're excluded through those earlier subparts in FAR Part 19 that we saw. Again, 84056, we looked at that 3 times, A through C. You can't limit awards on federal supply schedules based on socioeconomic status. 8405 refers to 1900A3. That's competitive. So what if the GWAC was a HubZone, SDVO, or WOSB competitive set-aside? It does not matter. So that's a key difference here between these types of sole source awards and 8A. It doesn't matter if the GWAC was a women-owned small business set-aside, an SDVO set-aside, or and we'll look at some quotes on that next. But let's take a look at 2 examples. Let's close up some of these other tabs. And you have to check with these HHS ones, you have to check a reference bid as well. Because they reuse the PID numbers. Okay, so this is an HHS order. We will just take a look over at, looks like it's against NITAC. GWAC, NITAC GWAC. I'll scroll down to the type of set-aside field. Nothing, full and open. I looked at the order, and I get an economically disadvantaged, women-owned small business, sole source, not allowed. Can't limit socioeconomic status. I'm using the same FAR citations as an FSS. Can't do it. Okay, now what if, though, you know, and if it's in 8A, we said there's a difference there in terms of whether the referenced IDV was an 8A award itself. What about, now here we get to think about how that plays out for the non-8A sole source award. Okay, here's the Department of State award against NASA SOUP. Let's look at the NASA SOUP GWAC first. NASA SOUP, GWAC. Let's come down to the type of set-aside field. Small business set-aside total. So you got a small business set-aside on the NASA SOUP GWAC, and all they did at the Department of State was, okay, look, it's already been limited on the GWAC. I'm just going to narrow that scope down a little bit, not a little bit, a lot bit more. I'm just going to slice off some more of the vendors and make it a sole source women-owned small business. Is that okay? The answer is no. Let's take a look at this slide. Now, one of the things I did in preparing this was and I was very fortunate, I sent some email correspondence to NASA SOUP, and the deputy program manager responded, which I thought was pretty good. Here's what she said. Sole source solicitations and awards are not part of the SOUP framework. Instructions are to post to at least everyone in one contract group and or select a socioeconomic designation such as hub zone and solicit to hub zones. In another email, for when I kept asking for additional clarification, she said, we do not recommend sole source awards and that issuing agencies post to at least one group. Posting to at least everyone in one group alleviates the need for special documentation and approval for sole source requirements that may in fact not be sole source. So she's saying, hey, look, that's not in our wheelhouse. We don't deal with socioeconomic sole source awards for NASA SOUP. That's what she's saying. Then if you look at the small SBGA, Small Business Jobs Act, I got that linked here, which is linked to SBA rule in the Federal Register 78 FR 6114, FAR case 2014-002. So if you look at this Federal Register rule, final rule by the SBA, here's what it says. Respondents have questioned whether orders may be set aside for certain socioeconomic categories under contracts that have already been set aside for a broader socioeconomic category, which is just what we saw in that last award by the State Department. For example, whether an order can be set aside for a hub zone small business concerns under a total small business set aside multiple award contract. In our case, it was an economically disadvantaged women-owned small business sole source, referencing a total small business set aside on the GWAC. And what does the SBA say? SBA believes that such an outcome would be unfair to the other small business concerns that competed for and obtained the contract. So, can't do it. So the conclusion, if you're doing a hub zone, SWO, women-owned small business sole source against an FSS or a GWAC, doesn't matter what you can't do it. That's what we're saying. Okay, one thing I got here that is a good question here is if you make a small business award to an SBA certified 8A company and you don't code in the type of set aside, do you not get any small business credit? Does everything go out the window? And the answer is no, which I think is, Randall's your question. You do get every small business credit coming to you in terms of women-owned small business, hub zone, small disadvantaged business, all of that's on the board. The only thing you don't get is the 8A credit if the type of set-aside field is not set to 8A sole source or 8A competitive. And there's that 2009 hub zone 8A sole source that got deprecated in 2009. So we're really talking about 8A sole source, 8A competitive. Okay, so I didn't read all of these. Of course, I mean, these are pretty lengthy, but I did read parts of them that I thought were applicable. All right, we're coming up to the last group. I might run just a little bit longer, but we're getting near the end. Sole source 8A awards against a GWAC. Okay, you can't limit sources based on that ordering against federal supply schedules. But again, as we saw, 198406A says separate offers and acceptance are not required for individual orders under multiple award contracts that have been set aside for exclusive competition among 8A contractors. Here's this proposed rule. We just looked at, I have it linked, but it's linked to that Small Business Jobs Act, SBA final rule. They're working on that FAR case right now. They've been working on it for a while, but it hasn't quite been finalized yet. What does the SBA say in its final rule? Sole source orders. The contracting officer may issue an order as a sole source when a multiple award contract was set aside for exclusive competition among 8A participants. Here we're getting into that 8A STARS program, which someone posted a question or comment on earlier. Conclusion number one, a sole source 8A award against a GWAC is not allowed if the GWAC used a full and open competition. Left off the 6. Okay, so here we're back to a NITAC order. GWAC, NITAC, type of set aside, full and open. Agriculture comes along, references that NITAC award. 8A sole source, can't do it. Can't limit based on socioeconomic status in that required supplies and services and then federal supply schedule subpart. Okay, as a general rule, you can't do that. Now let's look at this next one. This looks like an interior one. Yep. Okay, that's going against GSA award. Let's look at that. Okay, here's the GSA GWAC. Let's scroll down and see the type of set aside. 8A competed. Okay, is this part of the 8A STARS program? Yes. 8A stars. That's what it looks like to me. So here's the Department of Interior referencing 8A stars. 8A competed on the GWAC, 8A sole source on the order. That's okay. Based on the SBA, I put proposed. That rule is final. Have to check that. Based on FAR 19-8406, the proposed rule, once you're in the 8A world, you want to go an 8A sole source against an 8A competed GWAC. That's okay. Not only okay, that's FAR compliant and part of the whole point. How about competitive socioeconomic awards against a GWAC? Same thing as an FSS. All in the clear there. I did a lot of the talking here today. I tried to get some of the questions. Let's see, I didn't get one here. I did get one before we wrap up here. For government customers, our sole source task order. Oh, here, this is a good one. David posted this up. Thank you. From G8A stars, frequently asked questions for government customers. Are sole source task orders permitted? Yes. Based on Section 8A of the Small Business Act. You may award task orders on the 4 million competitive threshold on a sole source basis. We call this a directed order. Contract holders may take advantage of this unique provision based on self-marketing efforts or past performance. You must give all contract holders within a functional area fair opportunity to compete when they exceed 4 million competitive threshold in accordance with FAR 16. Thanks, David. I'll put that in the slides. So, in addition to some guidance I provided there, that's hopefully helpful. It comes right out of the frequently asked questions of the 8A stars program. Okay, in review, let's wrap up here. Remember, I'm going to send this to you tomorrow. You can look at examples for your department. You know, there are a lot of FSSs that there are a lot of orders against FSSs, and those FSSs used an 8A were an 8A sole source award. I have seen that. Actually, that's not what you're seeing here, though. There was no set-aside used on the FSS and an 8A sole source on the order. That's actually not permitted. All right, let's wrap up, because it's actually not that. We've talked about a lot of stuff here, but it's not that. In review, all competitive small business set-asides are FAR compliant when referencing FSSs and GWACs, subject to the contracting officer's discretion and all other applicable rules. No problem there. HUBZone sole source awards, service-disabled veteran-owned sole source awards, and women-owned small business sole source awards are not FAR compliant when referencing FSSs and GWACs under any circumstances. So if you look at the spreadsheet I'm going to send you tomorrow, the first one is that. You look at, here's the FSS, here's all of the HUBZone, women-owned sole source awards that reference those FSSs. Yeah, they're not FAR compliant. So that's easy. The second, so that's kind of two rules there. Here's the third rule. 8A sole source awards are FAR compliant when referencing FSSs and GWACs. If the referenced FSS GWAC used an 8A competed set-aside, or obviously the FS GWAC itself was an 8A sole source award. And we got that great frequently asked question post from 8A stars. You want to do a directed order against an 8A STARS that was 8A competed, make it 8A sole source, that's a part of the program. Can't do it if the FSS was full and open, but you can do it if it, for example, part of the 8A STARS program. What about socioeconomic sole source awards against other MACs such as IDCs? Well, you know, I think it's the same, but we really didn't go through it in this example. So that's to be addressed later. We have that Excel spreadsheet to look for examples in your department. Next week, we're going to talk about service contract inventories. Now, here's a question here. I wanted to, and we'll wrap up here. This is just, let me do these two last polls. Here's one that I thought was interesting. So that, you know, we looked through one there where it was an 8A sole source award. It was, what we looked at was, it was the agriculture award against the NITAC. So agriculture used an 8A sole source award, and they referenced a NITAC award that was full and open. My question is, well, how did that get approved? You know, I had to go through the SBA approval process. I'll show you another thing here in a second. Okay, I'm going to close it up because we're running a little bit over, but most of you said the SBA process, they didn't include what they intended to use as the vehicle when they went through the SBA approval process, some offer and acceptance. They didn't fully understand the rules. 5% think that my analysis might be off. So, what was I going to say? Oh, if you look at, so these are 8A sole source awards against federal supply schedules, and look at this. The SBA is making them. So if you look at this award, so, oh, you would think the, you know, so here's the SBA. They made an award against, we'll go see what that is, but it's an 8A sole source award. I went pretty quick on there just to show that 8A sole source. Small Business Administration going through the 8A program. What is this? What did they reference? They referenced a federal supply schedule that did not use a set-aside. So, you know, it's interesting. Okay, that's it. Thank you, everybody.